Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As we begin, I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people as the traditional owners and original custodians of this land and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I am Andrew Dixon, Vice President of the Duldig Studio Board, and will be the MC this morning as we celebrate two notable anniversaries. It is 40 years since the monument was unveiled and 80 years since Raoul Wallenberg's arrest by the Soviet authorities. Our speakers today are Councillor Sophie Tawney, Mayor of Boroondara, Stephen Cook, CEO of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, Mike Zervos, CEO of Courage to Care, Eva de Jong, daughter of Karl Duldig and founder of the Duldig Studio. Our last speaker is Rabbi Yaakov Lassman from the St Kilda Hebrew congregation.
I'm very honoured to join you here on behalf of Boroondara Council. So back in 1982, before the council amalgamations, Kew Council was approached by the Australasian Union of Jewish Students. They wanted to create a formal recognition in Kew to honour humanitarian Raoul Wallenberg. And so Kew Council, I was about to say we, but Kew Council supported this request and found this and provided this amazing location. And there was an official naming opening ceremony in May 1984, and then the monument was commissioned by the Free Wallenberg Committee and created by Karl Duldig. And this monument was unveiled in January 1985. So we're standing on the place 40 years ago to mark this milestone and to honour Raoul Wallenberg. I know that others here today are going to talk about Wallenberg and his life and humanitarian achievements, and how his exceptional bravery and determination made a huge impact during a very dark period in human history. As a local, my family and I have passed this memorial for 25 years, and when the kids were little, we stopped and had a really good look at it, and we looked up all about the story, because that curiosity is why we have statues like this. It becomes a very important thing. And when we talk about building a welcoming, inclusive community, it's not just an idea, it's something we show through our actions. Some of the ways we support and celebrate the community are through our multicultural action plan and our interfaith network. And we bring members from a range of cultures, faiths and religious traditions together, and we organise events such as the International Day of Peace. So thriving communities are built on a foundation of belonging and understanding. By working together with community groups in the 1980s, Kew Council was able to provide this site to honour Raoul Wallenberg and his courageous humanitarian achievements. A visit to this garden and monument invites us all to pause and to contemplate. While we know that symbols alone can't solve every problem, monuments like this one, honouring Raoul Wallenberg, are reminders of what's come before. And in doing so, they also provide us hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to today and for the invitation to speak to you. It's a privilege to say a few words, and I've been asked to speak about the importance of memorials and to reflect on this very special memorial to Raoul Wallenberg, created by Karl Duldig. Memorials matter, as we've heard. It's been suggested that the memorial landscape is an exercise in learning, teaching the community what to think, feel and remember. We learn about the past from what society considers important enough to remember and to evoke in material form. And as we've seen over the past few years with the toppling of Confederate statues in the United States, or debates over statues relating to imperialist legacies in Britain, South Africa, Australia and in many other places, the politics of memorials generate often heated debate as to which and whose histories should be remembered. These debates often link past and contemporary injustices, illustrating the unfinished business of the past in the present. This isn't new, and memorials has always been sites of debate, over different visions and versions of the past, particularly at times of political and social change. And Holocaust memorials aren't immune from these debates. Memorials to the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, for example, under the influence of the former Soviet Union, often downplayed Jews as a victims group, subsumed within a righteous narrative of the fight against fascism. They have since been altered over time to reflect current historical understandings and accord with current political agendas. Memory never stays settled. But rather than judge Holocaust memorials on historical accuracy or their aesthetic merit, the art critic James Young argues that we should judge them on their ability to provoke, to ask us to think differently about how we understand the past, but also the ability to help us reflect on how we might live differently in the present. However, Jay Winter reminds us there's often something about memorials that repels attention. They are, in his evocative phrase, often white noise in stone. And this kind of echoes Robert Mussell's famous point that war memorials, there's nothing almost as invisible as a war memorial. They often fade into the background, becoming part of the everyday, losing the ability to ask questions of us in the present, losing the ability to provoke. But this memorial isn't invisible. It does provoke. And Karl Duldig's genius is to draw us into the history of the Holocaust through Wallenberg's story, through the conception, design, and execution of the memorial. The setting here is an integral part of the memorial, perhaps implying that this is both a local story, embedded in the landscape here in Melbourne, and a global story. We don't know when Wallenberg died, and the deliberate lack of a date of his death in Karl's original conception, which has now been changed, also originally disrupted the temporality of the Holocaust. This is a history that's not past. It's explicitly an ongoing story. It is unfinished business, and I do think it's a shame that that date has been added. So rather than understanding the Holocaust as something that happened far away and long ago, the memorial provokes us to think about why the Holocaust matters here and matters now. And it matters because of the lived experience of the many, many Holocaust survivors who came to Melbourne before, during and after the war, including of course the Duldigs. And even if we don't have a familial connection to the Holocaust, this is the story of people who live in our streets, are part of a community. It's part of the Melbourne story. It matters because, as we've seen in the tragic and unsettling events over the last 15 months, the scourge of anti-Semitism hasn't gone away. And clear evidence suggests that learning about the Holocaust, both in schools and in museums, is strongly correlated with attitudes that foster social cohesion and combat anti-Semitism. And I congratulate the Duldig Studio and the Courage to Care and the work of my team at the Holocaust Museum, who do so much in this space. And finally, it matters because throughout all of the darkness, there is some light. And the memorial instructs us not to be a bystander, and that people like Raoul Wallenberg, who were prepared to stand up for what is right, can make a difference. Thank you.
So the whole idea of creating a charity was not to duplicate the wonderful work that we've just heard about from our Holocaust Museum, which is spectacular, but it's to focus on behaviours, to look at how people behaved during the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, to look at those who stood by and did nothing. You and I would know them as a bystander, but more importantly, to focus on those who did have the moral courage, the courage to care, to stand up and take action, even at their own peril. So you can see the obvious link between the ethos and mission of Courage to Care and us being so proud to talk about Raoul Wallenberg. I can proudly say that what Courage to Care does is visit Victorian schools. And this year over 20,000 Victorian students will hear the story of people like Raoul Wallenberg and not only learn about his actions, but also be challenged to consider their own actions. So this isn't just about history. This is about our behaviours today, in our children and in ourselves. So that's why Courage to Care is very proud to be represented here at such an important day. And there's a bit of a concept which may go back to the ancient Egyptians or even earlier that says we die twice.
Yeah.
Once when we physically pass, but the second time is the last time our name is mentioned.
Wow.
So again, today is so important because by talking about Raoul Wallenberg, by using his name, by remembering his heroic deeds, he lives on through all of us. But just like when a Courage to Care volunteer goes into a school and challenges the behaviour of a student to consider their own actions, to consider their language, and as Steve talked about in these times where social cohesion is under threat, to consider the things they consider a joke, to consider the chants that they make, to consider the words they use in their behaviours, and also to consider the fact they stand by and do nothing. We talk about Raoul Wallenberg, but we challenge the students to actually consider what they can do in their own way to be what we call an upstander. That's the positive term, to be an upstander. So just like we talk about Raoul Wallenberg to students and challenge them to consider their behaviours, today is more than just remembering. Today is about us considering how we can be inspired by Raoul Wallenberg's legacy. How we can take his memory, his actions, his courage, and consider how that can impact on us. And just like we talk to students, I'm talking to myself as well as everybody here to say that today is about recognising Raoul Wallenberg as an upstander, as someone who took positive action, and to challenge each and every one of us to do the same thing. So I've been honoured to be with you today. As I said, congratulations to the Duldig family and the council for putting this on for us today. And I challenge each and every one of us to be upstanders, not bystanders. Thank you.
First of all, I just wanted to refer back to Mike, who was your immediate past speaker, and say I'm very pleased that he has extended Eva and the Duldig family to all of you, because I would like to include you in the Duldig family. This is not me, this is you, this is the Duldig studio and everybody who's here today. I'd also like to thank our other previous speakers, Sophie Tawney from the City of Burundara for her amazing address, and also to Steve Cook, who I've come to know very well from the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. Where have you disappeared to, Steve? Oh, behind a tree. Who also gave us such an inspiring talk. And Mike, thank you again, because everybody had something so significant to tell us. I go back, as you can imagine, quite a long way. I've got lots of grey hair, but there are some people here who were here 40 years ago. And would you mind standing up or putting your hand up if you were here 40 years ago? There you are. Isn't that wonderful? These people are special because they witnessed an amazing event. An event when the Israeli ambassador and the Swedish consulate and the luminaries of the Jewish community as well, and many, many other guests, particularly people from the neighbours, came together and had a ceremony to unveil this monument behind me. And I'm really sad that we can't actually be in front of the monument, because what I'm going to tell you about it really needs you to look at it. So when I've finished, I do hope you do go up and actually have a good look at it. So the first time I actually heard about was from Raoul Wallenberg was when Frank Mider and John Copeland came to visit my father in our house in 92 Burke Road, East Malvern, in the early 1980s, and asked my father to design a monument for Raoul Wallenberg. That was, for me, an eye-opener, and I came to read a great deal about this amazing person and came under his spell. My father also was greatly moved because, of course, he and I were Holocaust survivors, if you want to put that term to us. And so all of these things bring back memories, especially to the older generation, less so my generation. My father had previously done a monument which was erected in Israel for the people who died during the Holocaust who were connected with the amazing Viennese sports club Hakoah. And John and Frank loved the designs of that monument. And so my father thought, okay, that must be something that I can also do here. And he created first a maquette. A small maquette is a small version of the larger work, in case for those of you who don't know. And his symbolism was out of the destruction of the Holocaust, out of the terror, out of the horror, somebody was able to aspire to greatness. And that, in this instance, was Raoul Wallenberg. And therefore, when you look at the monument, think about those stones, those large stones, they symbolize the destruction. But that man, that amazing man, who has become a legend in our lifetime, Raoul Wallenberg, is at the top of the monument, giving us all hope and inspiring us. Now, coming down to earth, I went back to my notes last night and I came across what I'd written when I gave a talk here in 1993 about the monument, and I described the stones. And I have to now single out Therese and Wayne Hallett. Where are you? Oh, there. Therese and Wayne Hallett are from Hallett Stone. Now, my father was working with Phil Hallett, Wayne's father, for a very long time, because as a sculptor, you work with stonemasons and you get your stones with stonemasons. And so my father chose to work with Phil Hallett to create the base for the monument. And I can recall going out to Campbellfield with my dad and with Phil Hallett's help selecting the stones and putting them up in the stonemason's yard first and moving them around, not by hand, by crane. You can imagine these heavy stones. Now, just a little about what I've said about the stones and what I failed to recollect till I read it last night. The large sandstone supporting the stone came from the demolished bank at the corner of Flinders Lane and Elizabeth Street in Melbourne. They are Hawkesbury River sandstone. The long triangular stone is from Harcourt and it's grey granite, quarried near Stawell. Another piece of red granite originates from Finland and is the same stone as was used in Red Square in Moscow, while the handsome red granite on which the head rests is red calcite granite from the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. I think that in itself is symbolic. It unites our country, it unites Europe, it unites us all. And it's a strange thing. I only thought of that when I reread this, but it is amazing how these things can sort of come together. And I'm really pleased that I can actually single this out or tell you about this, because I suppose I'm the only one who really knows this now. Unless Wayne, you may recall, because Wayne was working on the monument when it was erected here on site. So I have mentioned Frank and John, and I've mentioned the people who were connected with this erection of the monument so long ago, and now comes to welcoming and introducing a friend of mine who's been a wonderful, wonderful inspiration to the community in Melbourne, not just the Jewish community, but the general community. That is Rabbi Yaakov Glasman. Now, Rabbi Glasman is absolutely an inspiration in his own right, in his interfaith work in the community. And I read every time the little newsletter comes out on Thursday night from the St Kilda Shul. I always read Rabbi Glasman because it's always inspirational. And now I would like to hand you over to Rabbi Glasman. Thank you.
Friends, it is a real honor to be here, and I thank each and every one of you individually and collectively for affording me the opportunity to share a prayer, which I'll do in just a moment. But before doing so, Eva asked earlier for a show of hands for those who were standing here exactly 4 decades ago, witnessing the historic erection of this monument. At that time, I was a 5-year-old boy growing up in Melbourne, blissfully unaware of the darkness and the anguish and the grief that all 4 of my grandparents had experienced, losing their entire families in the Holocaust, in the Shoah, before they joined so many others who were the lucky ones to have survived in coming here to Melbourne to build new families, and that indeed they did. It is in the times of darkness that when an individual lights a fire, lights a match, that fire becomes all the more illuminating. Raoul Wallenberg was one such person. He lit a match, he lit a candle, but he did so in the most extreme and extenuating of circumstances. He did so at the risk of his own life, in a way that would serve as a testament for humanity, for goodness, for kindness, for decency, for morality, for years and decades and indeed generations to come. And that is why we honor him today at this momentous occasion and on this momentous anniversary. And I would conclude, before reciting the actual prayer, to simply say that although Raoul himself, he was not actually Jewish, but he did, as I've researched last night, a genealogy test on himself and found that he had 1/16 Jewish genealogy in his blood, but he publicly stated that he was very, very proud of that 1/16. I would hope to be just 1/16 of the human being that Raoul was, and in many ways spiritually still is. And that is simply because our rabbis say that when you light a candle in a dark place, a little bit of light dispels much, much darkness. And that is exactly what Raoul Wallenberg did in his life. So I thank each of you for being here to join me on this occasion. We're now going to honor Raoul in a traditional Jewish way by reciting a memorial prayer in Hebrew, which I'll translate briefly into English immediately thereafter. Only for those who are able and comfortable to stand, I would invite you to do so at this point, as is customary during this prayer. El Malei Rachamim Shochem B'Maromim Amtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechinah B'Malot Kedoshim U'Torim K'Zoyar Rakia Masirim Et Nishmat Raoul Wallenberg Mechasidei Umot Olam Sholach Li'olamo Ba'avur Sh'anachnu Mitpalelim B'yad Azkarat Nishmato B'Gan Eden Tei Menuchato Lachein Ba'al Harachamim Yasduel B'Seit K'nafav Li'olamim Yitzro B'Torah Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Li'anuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Raoul Wallenberg of blessed memory, from the righteous among the nations, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his rest be in heaven. May the Master of Compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the eternal bond of life. May God be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace, and let us respond, Amen. Thank you very much.